The New Orleans Saints finished the 2024 season with a 5-12 record and missed the playoffs for the fourth straight year. It wasn't a surprise they missed the playoffs, but what was a surprise was how they started the 2024 season, then completely fell off the wagon. During the first two games of the year, they put up 91 total points and had victory margins of 37 points over the Panthers in Week 1 and 25 points over the Cowboys in Dallas in Week 2. People may not remember this, but after the first two games, there were a lot of wild thoughts about the 2024 Saints and how far they could go. People were talking about how Clint Kubiak was hitting his stride and that he was the next offensive mastermind and that Derek Carr was going to have a career year and that the Saints were going to be legitimate contenders. I know that seems like a different lifetime ago, but those thoughts were out there. The Saints proceeded to go 0-7 in their next 7 games, to which Dennis Allen was fired, and here we are 6 months later with the Saints' future looking as dim as it ever has. They hired Super Bowl champion offensive coordinator Kellen Moore to be the team's next head coach, and while that could work out in the long run, right now specifically, the Saints are in a bad situation. And in today's video, we're going to break down how we got here, what the next steps are, and what they can realistically do to become a contender year in and year out. And there is a lot to break down in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing how we got here with the New Orleans Saints, and to make a long story short, they never committed to a full rebuild after Drew Brees retired after the 2020 season, and have been trying to get back to the playoffs to make a run since. They started out with a 5-2 record in 2021 with Jameis Winston as the starting quarterback before Jameis tore his ACL in a game against the Bucs. Unfortunately, injuries happened, and that more or less derailed the 2021 Saints season, and after starting out 5-2, they proceeded to lose 5 games in a row to fall to 5-7 before eventually finishing 9-8. That was the final year under former head coach Sean Payton, and Dennis Allen took over in 2022. The Saints started out the 2022 season with a 1-2 record with Jameis starting, and they turned the ball over 9 times in 3 games, and Andy Dalton took over from there. Andy Dalton didn't play particularly bad in the 2022 season, but a 35-year-old Andy Dalton starting for your team with a rookie Chris Olave, Juwan Johnson, Alvin Kamara, Rashid Shaheed, and Traquan Smith was what you needed to know about the 2022 Saints offense and the receiving core. Sure, they had some moments, but they started out 4-9 before winning 3 of their final 4 games to make their 7-10 record look a lot better than how their season actually played out. After the 2022 season, it made a lot of sense to, well, everyone, I guess, except for general manager Mickey Loomis, to start rebuilding and to trade away players like Marshawn Lattimore and Alvin Kamara, and to get what you can for them before it's too late, before they lose their trade value. But Mickey Loomis had a 20 at the blackjack table in terms of limited cap space, an aging roster, and a not great head coach, and said, "Hit me," and gave Derek Carr a $150 million contract, and not surprisingly, the Saints have not made the playoffs since Derek Carr became a New Orleans Saint, and Dennis Allen has since been fired. And if you know anything about how Mickey Loomis operates around the salary cap with the Saints, well, there's usually no vision for tomorrow, and it's all about today. And I respect that to a degree, because you have to win games, and no team actively wants to go through a rebuild. But when you look at this roster and you look at what guys are getting paid, especially for their age and their contribution at this point, it's not wrong to say this is incredibly poor general managing of the roster. Derek Carr is what he is as a player, and he should have never received a $150 million contract, and to think he was the missing piece between the Saints going to the Super Bowl and where they were at the time of the signing, to me, was always ridiculous. You can at least try and say that it was an upgrade at the quarterback position if you really want to, though I know Saints fans are sick of Derek Carr, but one move that was really bad that is still affecting the Saints to this day was giving a 34-year-old Cam Jordan a 2-year extension that was fully guaranteed, worth $28 million. Not surprisingly, in the trenches, and after playing over 12,000 career snaps, Cam Jordan is not the player he was in his prime, and he had a year you would expect a 14-year veteran to have in 2024, as he really declined from the player he was even 3 or 4 years ago, yet is on the hooks for $20 million in 2025, and this is per overthecap.com. I fully realize Cam is an 8-time Pro Bowler and should undoubtedly receive a phone call the minute he retires, letting him know he will be inducted into the Saints Ring of Honor the following year after his retirement, preferably at halftime in a game against the hated division rival Falcons, but this was an egregiously terrible decision by Mickey Loomis to extend Cam Jordan and hurt the cap in the process, even despite the cap going up as time goes on. And when you look at the Saints cap situation, it's obviously not good for several reasons. This information will be either from Over the Cap or Spotrac.com, and at the time of this video release, the Saints currently have $50.7 million in dead cap, which is 4th in the NFL. For those who may not know, what that means is they are paying previous players a total of $50.7 million in 2025 to not play for the Saints. Obviously, you want as little dead cap money as possible, but it's not enough for the Saints to have that amount of money going towards players not playing for the team. They're also dead last in cap space at the time of this video release, as they're $46 million over the cap right now. The three biggest dead cap hits they have is Marshawn Lattimore with a whopping $31.6 million dead cap hit. Michael Thomas, yes, the receiver Michael Thomas, has a dead cap hit of $9.1 million, and Jameis Winston has a dead cap hit of $7.3 million. One of my biggest frustration with the Saints and the way they run their accounting books, if you will, is the way they manipulate the cap. You may hear on social media that the cap isn't real, and despite the lack of on-field results, I think the Saints are actually a pretty good example of that. And what I mean by this is right now, Derek Carr, Cam Jordan, Tyrann Mathieu, and Chase Young, who is a free agent by the way, are scheduled to make $91.7 million cumulatively from the Saints in 2025. So what the Saints will do, and why I am so frustrated with the way their organization is, they will have void years for players and restructure contracts, which in the simplest terms converts their salaries to a bonus that can be prorated over the remaining years of the contract for salary cap purposes. This is why Chase Young, who signed a one-year $13 million deal with the Saints last offseason, and a player who had a pretty solid year for the Saints all things considered, will no longer be on the roster in 2025, at least I would be shocked if he was, and will still get paid $9 million from the Saints this year. The $9 million he is making this year from the Saints was pushed back from last year, so they could, you guessed it, just to be able to get under the salary cap for the 2024 season. And this is a large reason why the Saints' job was so unattractive to begin with after they fired Dennis Allen. The reality is you almost have to give up a year, meaning 2025, just to have a chance to get the books right for 2026. And then you throw in the fact the new head coach has to work with Derek Carr for at least a year, rather than potentially drafting their future franchise quarterback, and in 2026, at least at the moment, because we know the Saints will certainly manipulate the cap again, you will have Derek Carr and what will be a 31-year-old Alvin Kamara on the books for a combined $80 million. All of this to say is why I've been frustrated with the Saints for multiple years. This isn't a situation that got like this overnight, and it's okay when you're winning games back in 2017, 2018, and 2019 when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback and a really good head coach, and I'm not taking a shot at Sean Payton not getting in the Hall of Fame by saying a really good coach, it's just that head coaches getting into the Hall of Fame is really weird, but the point is, Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, and even Kellen Moore and Derek Carr, do not put band-aids over the problems the way Sean Payton and Drew Brees once did. Throw in the fact you're also paying Taysom Hill nearly $18 million in 2025, and it's an extremely tough pill to swallow that this franchise has $89 million this year currently allocated for Derek Carr, Cameron Jordan, and Taysom Hill. And this all plays to why they are in a bad situation. Now, usually when we do videos discussing teams' outlooks and what they can do moving forward, realistically that is, we usually talk about the teams in their division quite a bit, and that's because that makes up over a third of their schedule, and a team like the Browns, who are about to go through a rebuild, are in a completely different situation than what the Saints are in because they have both Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow in their division. That obviously isn't ideal to play for a quarter of your schedule, but the Saints are in a bit of a different situation themselves in the NFC South, and here's why. I acknowledge the trajectory of both the Falcons and Panthers are going to be on the rise entering 2025, as it should be by the way, and I'm incredibly happy for Bryce Young with the way he finished the 2024 season, and the fact it looked like the monkey was finally off of his back, and it's not wrong to say that he looked like a completely different player in the final handful of games in 2024. But whenever people talk about a player who is on the verge of breaking out, or had a good handful of games the way Bryce Young did, the best is always projected, and I get it, you don't want to sit here and say, well, what if Bryce goes back to the beginning of 2024 Bryce and looks like a draft bust? I don't think that will happen, but even if he is the player we saw most recently, I don't think the Panthers are head and shoulders above the Saints at the moment. I obviously like the Panthers' future a lot more than I like the Saints' future, and that's due in large part to both coaching and the offensive outlook, but my point is, I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints split games with the Panthers next year, and I think the same can be said for the Falcons too. Now, if I had to predict a winner between the Saints and Falcons with an offseason of work for Michael Penix and the Falcons, I do think Atlanta would sweep the Saints in 2025, but the point is, I don't think it's unreasonable for the Saints to go 2-4 in the NFC South, and maybe even 3-3, though at this point, I think the Bucs are a definitive tier above the Saints. But the reason I am concerned for the Saints entering 2025 is, while I don't think they're a good team by any means, and I would never choose this team to go on the road to a Philly, LA Rams, Detroit, or wherever to go win a road playoff game, much less 3 in a row, I don't think they are bottom of the NFC finish with a top 2 pick bad. And I would argue the Saints are in the worst position in sports at the moment, and I think Derek Carr plays a pretty significant part within that, and Mickey Loomis for that matter too. I just don't think there's any way that Mickey Loomis, given that he's been with the Saints organization since the year 2000, looks at this roster regardless of what they do this offseason, because remember, they're always going to be limited financially, at least with how Mickey Loomis runs the organization, and thinks to himself, you know what? This team is going to win 13 games and shock everyone, and we're going to bring this city a Super Bowl. I don't buy it. And with 2 of the 3 teams in the division in a clear rebuild mode, that's a dangerous situation to be in because you can inevitably win a couple of games and hurt your draft stock in the process. Now, I completely understand and acknowledge you can't say to Cam Jordan to go out and play bad intentionally, and even the younger players on the roster and to lose games so we can effectively replace you with better players. That's obviously not how professional sports works, but with the uncertainty around really every skill position on offense at the moment, and with not great drafting over the course of the last few years, combined with a team that never acknowledges they need to rebuild, you have the perfect recipe for where the Saints currently are. And that's a team that's destined for a 4-7 win season in 2025 with a self-induced terrible cap situation and a very bleak future. So what can the Saints actually do to get out of this mess? And I mean realistically. Well, per overthecap.com, they can restructure Derek Carr, which is to be expected, and by doing so, the $46 million cap hit he currently has would shrink down to $15 million, again per over the cap. This would of course affect the 26 and 27 salary cap, though not as much as you may think right now, as they are $65 million under the cap in 26, and by making this move, they would still be $57 million under the cap. They'll also have to restructure Cam Jordan to Taysom Hill too, and I wouldn't be surprised if they designate Taysom Hill as a post-June 1st cut, given that he will be 35 years old in August. They'll also have to restructure a couple of other players, whether it's Demario Davis or Carl Granderson or both, and go from there. And they'll also have to make a decision on Tyrann Mathieu at some point, and my best guess, in terms of what the Saints actually plan to do at this point, is to use 2025 as a get-right year and focusing on building a better team in 2026. I was never hopeful with this team under Dennis Allen, and I thought at best that maybe they would win a playoff game and get bounced in the divisional round of the playoffs. But with Kellen Moore coming over from the Eagles, this is the first year in several years for the Saints where I legitimately think Mickey Loomis will be grounded to a degree and that there will be some sort of long-term vision in place with this franchise. The reason I think that is internally, I believe they convinced themselves that because they won 4 of their final 5 games in 2023 and actually ended up finishing top 10 in both offensive and defensive points per game in 2023, that they were only a piece or 2 away entering last year. And I think that goes back to signing a player like Chase Young in free agency, who was by every definition a boom or bust player. But they started out 2-7 in 2024 and were humbled in a lot of ways. And remember, this isn't a division with Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow staring at you for 4 games a year, or with Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and Bo Nix playing against you for a third of your schedule. I like Baker Mayfield, Bryce Young, and Michael Penix a lot, but right now with the Saints having 4 picks in the top 100, 3 of their own and 1 from the Marshawn Lattimore trade with the Commanders, I really believe their best bet is to try and draft someone like Armand Bambou in the first round of pick 9, draft someone like a Tyleik Williams from Ohio State who would help the run defense in a big way in the second round if he's there, and go with the best player available with their third round picks at any of the edge, tight end, or receiver positions and go from there. Rebuilding the Saints the right way is going to take time, and it's almost inevitable that 2025 is going to be a reset year for them. There's a lot of bad money on the roster right now, and unfortunately for the Saints, it's going to take some time to get rid of the bad money and to ultimately build for a better tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel tremendously and is very much appreciated. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.